In this video, we'll be demonstrating how to replace the fork seals in the Showa separate function forks. This is part 2 of this 2-part video, and in this video we're only focusing on the right fork, or the spring side fork. If you want to view the left fork or damping assembly side rebuild, simply click on the link in the bottom right hand corner. To service this right fork, we'll need a few specialty tools such as the Motion Pro seal bullet, the Motion Pro seal driver, and the Tusk fork cap wrench. We're also going to need the Racetech fork spring compressor, which allows us to compress this heavy duty spring enough to loosen the lock nut and then remove the fork cap. We're also going to need a few standard tools like you see here, but most importantly we'll need our service manual, which contains some machine specific instructions and specifications that we need in order to correctly complete this job. So we'll start by backing up the preload adjuster all the way, and you'll want to count the number of clicks it takes to do this, so you can set it back to where it was after you've completed the rebuild. Next we'll loosen and remove that fork cap using the Tusk cap wrench, and then slide that outer tube down a little and go ahead and drain the oil. And once you have most all the oil drained, we can move on to compressing the spring. First, notice the 2 holes in the fork spring guide. Then we're going to go ahead and install the fork into the spring compressor, and then align these 2 holes, one with the inside pin, and then thread the bolt into the other side just hand tight to secure the outside. It should look like this. Now we'll take our 14mm ratchet wrench and begin compressing the spring. You could also use a socket and ratchet to do this. Once you compress it far enough, you'll start to see the bottom of the adjuster, and then the lock nut comes next. We'll use a 17mm end wrench to hold the adjuster, and then use our 14mm end wrench to back off that lock nut. Once you've got that loose, go ahead and remove the fork cap adjuster. And next we'll remove that spring collar, and then go ahead and loosen up the spring. Once you have it all the way loose, back that bolt out of the spring guide, and then remove the fork from the compressor. To remove the spring, we first need to remove that lock nut from the rod, and then remove that spring guide as well. Doing that will allow us to go ahead and remove the spring from the fork. And we'll go ahead and set that onto our clean rags. And next we'll pump that outer tube and the piston rod to remove any oil remaining inside the fork. And then we'll move on to removing the dust seal and the retaining clip with a flat blade screwdriver. You'll want to be careful not to scratch the inner tube while you're doing this. And with those both removed, we can tip up the fork and give it a couple pops, and then separate the outer tube and the inner tube. That's going to reveal the inner bushing, the outer bushing, washer, and oil seal. And now we'll secure that lower fork in a vise. Then go ahead and remove that inner bushing, along with the outer bushing. And then comes the washer and the oil seal. We're also going to pull the retaining clip and the dust seal as well. And now we'll quickly wipe off that lower tube and then move on to inspecting our bushings. And we're looking at the Teflon coating on the outside of the inner bushing and the inside of the outer bushing. If you find any tears, marks, or the lower layer starting to show through, go ahead and replace the bushing. These both look fine, so we'll continue with reassembly. So we've got our new seals. We're going to apply a little grease to the inside of the dust seal, and then put a little grease on the oil seal as well. And to protect these seals from the sharp edge where the inner bushing sits, we'll go ahead and install the Motion Pro seal bullet to protect these seals and make that transition nice and smooth. And now we're ready to install our dust seal. Slide that down. Next comes the retaining clip, and then the oil seal. Make sure it's facing the right way. Once that's on, we'll apply a little grease to the outside to make it easier to remove the next time we need to replace it. After the oil seal, we can install the washer, then the outer bushing, and finally the inner bushing. You might need to spread it, and make sure it seats correctly in that groove. Now we'll just clean the outer tube out a little bit and then reinstall it onto the lower tube. And then we'll use the seal driver to install the outer bushing, washer, and oil seal up to the outer tube. You'll be able to hear when they've seated correctly. Now go ahead and remove that seal driver, then slide up and install the retaining clip. And using the seal driver makes it easy to seat this clip into its groove. And the last part to install here is the dust seal. We'll just use the axle clamp on the lower tube to push against and force that seal up into place. From there we can install the spring, and we've got the fork laid on its side to allow us to do this without the rod falling back down into the fork. Make sure you're installing it the same way that it came out. And once you've got that installed, go ahead and stand the fork up and continue to hold the rod up while you reinstall the spring guide and the lock nut. Now that this is assembled, we'll reinstall the fork back into the compressor, and then we'll compress the spring the same way we did before. And after you have it compressed far enough, you want to make sure the lock nut is threaded on as far as it'll go. And you can reinstall that spring collar and then thread on the adjuster cap. And it's important to make sure this cap threads all the way onto the rod, and you should still have at least a 0.5 millimeter clearance between the cap and the lock nut. If everything looks good, go ahead and back that lock nut up against the cap, and then we'll tighten it down and then torque it to 15 foot-pounds. And now we can loosen that compressor back up, and you'll want to make sure the collar seats correctly onto the adjuster cap. When you've got it loose enough, back that top bolt out, then remove the fork from the tool. And now we're ready for oil, so we've measured our recommended amount using a ratio right. We'll go ahead and pour that into the fork. This amount will vary with each bike and rider, so you just refer to your service manual for each application. Now we can slide that outer tube back up and thread the adjuster cap back into it. We'll go ahead and tighten this as much as we can with the cap wrench, and then you'll finish tightening this cap with the fork back on the bike and only the lower triple clamps tightened. And now we'll just set our preload back to where it was, and we're ready to ride. If you have any questions about this forks rebuild, feel free to give us a call at 1-800-336-5437. If you need to see the left fork rebuild, click on the related videos link. Thanks for watching.